Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. In our last video, we talked about how to finally stop translating in your head. But let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a conversation, you know the word you want to use, and suddenly your brain just hits a brick wall? Oh, that dreaded freeze. Total silence, your mind goes blank, and you start wondering if the other person can hear your heart beating. If that's ever happened to you, don't worry. You are not alone. Today, we're looking at why that happens. And more importantly, my top 5 time buyer phrases to help you stop freezing and keep the conversation alive.
Picture this. You're sitting in a high stakes meeting. Maybe you're interviewing for a big promotion or, trying to explain a really complex project to a new client.
Oh man, the tension is already building just thinking about it.
Right. The whole room goes totally quiet. And a crucial question is directed right at you. You open your mouth to respond. And, well, we all expect our brains to work like modern search engines in those moments.
Exactly. You type a thought, you hit enter, and you get these immediate, flawless results.
Yeah, but instead of delivering that crisp, articulate answer, your brain's search engine completely crashes. You're just staring at this blank internal screen.
Yeah.
I mean, you just freeze.
It is the absolute definition of a conversational system failure. The pressure is mounting, the silence stretches out, and suddenly you feel like you've forgotten how to speak your own language, let alone a second one if you happen to be bilingual.
Welcome to the deep dive. Because today, our mission is to explore that exact, terrifying phenomenon, the brain freeze. We're drawing from a really fascinating masterclass transcript put together by 2 language and communication coaches,
Yeah, and they've engineered what they call a translation bypass emergency kit.
which is such a cool name. So whether you're learning a new language, prepping for a tense corporate negotiation, or, you're just someone who occasionally loses their train of thought when put on the spot, this deep dive is going to arm you with the psychological tools to take back control.
And we are going to explore specific time-buying strategies and, honestly, the cognitive psychology that makes them work. So you can sound effortlessly fluent while your brain is busy catching up in the background.
It's an incredibly practical set of sources because, well, it refuses to just hand you a superficial script of things to say. It breaks down the actual architecture of the panic.
Right. We really have to understand the underlying mechanics of why a freeze happens before we can effectively deploy any kind of solution.
So let's get right into the mechanics of that crash. The source material uses this analogy that I think paints the picture perfectly. Trying to mentally translate or even just frantically construct a complex thought while you're actively speaking is like trying to run 2 massive operating systems on a severely outdated laptop.
Yes. The hardware simply cannot handle the processing demands. The fan starts spinning out of control, the screen lags, and eventually the entire system just locks up to protect itself.
And in real life, that lockup looks like you standing in front of someone with your mouth half open, literally screaming internally while you frantically search your mental archives for, like, a single verb.
Yeah, the coaches highlight this as a tragic mismatch in the timeline of the conversation.
A tragic mismatch. What do they mean by that?
Well, think of the conversation as a video track. The playhead, the current moment of the actual real-world interaction is currently at, say, 35 seconds. The person you're talking to is living at the 35-second mark, waiting for your input. But your internal processing, that is stuck back at 32 seconds. Your brain is obsessing over finding the perfect word or double-checking the grammar of a sentence you haven't even started yet.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it's basically like trying to stream a 4K movie on 90s dial-up internet. The bandwidth just isn't there, and the buffering circle of death takes over.
That is exactly what it feels like.
By the time you formulate that flawless sentence in your head, the real-world conversation has already moved on. You are essentially living 3 seconds in the past. But, and I want to push back on this a little bit, if the problem is just needing a few extra seconds to buffer, why do we need special emergency phrases at all?
You mean, why not just pause?
Yeah. Why can't I just channel my inner stoic, take a deep breath, and hold my ground in complete silence until the word comes to me?
It seems like the most logical approach, right? But cognitive psychology shows us that dead silence is actually the most destructive thing you can introduce in that moment.
Really? Just being quiet is destructive.
Absolutely. It comes down to cognitive load theory, which is how we measure the amount of information working memory can hold at one time.
And the source notes, that's a core concept in educational psychology, right?
It is. So imagine your brain's working memory as a small physical table. It has a strict, non-negotiable weight limit. When you're speaking under pressure, You are trying to balance three very different types of heavy boxes on this small table.
Okay, I'm visualizing the table. What are the boxes?
First, you have the intrinsic load. That is the natural, unavoidable complexity of what you're trying to say. So the grammar rules, the specific vocabulary, the actual substance of your point.
So that's the heavy lifting of the conversation itself.
Exactly. Then you have the germane load. This is the deep processing required to actually build new mental schemas, to learn from the interaction in real time, and to creatively construct the language.
Okay, it makes sense. And the third one?
Finally, you have the extraneous load. This is the mental effort wasted on things completely outside the task itself. It's the environmental distractions, the anxiety, and crucially, the intense fear of looking incompetent in front of your peers.
Oh, wow. So if I just stand there silently, I'm basically piling on that extraneous load box.
You are causing it to explode. When you stand there in complete dead silence, the tension in the room thickens. Your brain notices the awkward silence. It notices the other person staring at you, waiting.
Oh, God, that is the worst feeling.
It immediately starts panicking. Your internal monologue shifts to, they think I'm unqualified, what is the word? That panic takes massive, heavy boxes of extraneous load and slams them down onto the small table of your working memory.
And the table just collapses under the weight. You have absolutely zero capacity left to actually retrieve the vocabulary you were looking for in the first place because you're entirely consumed by the social panic of the silence.
Precisely. The silence becomes fatal to your fluency. However, when you vocalize a strategic time buyer phrase, you instantly eliminate that extraneous panic. It acts as a cognitive reset.
Because you're breaking the silence.
Exactly. By speaking, you signal to the other person that you are still in control of the floor, which instantly lowers your own stress.
It's like going into your phone and clearing the cache. You're deleting the anxiety data so the processor can get back to its primary job of finding the words.
That's a great way to look at it.
So if silence is the enemy, how do we fill that silence without sounding like we're just helplessly stalling? This brings us to the emergency kit itself. These strategies aren't just about killing time. They're designed to actively manipulate how the listener perceives your pause.
Right, you are managing the social perception.
Yeah. And one of the most effective shields the coaches suggest is simply saying, let me think about how to put this.
It's a phenomenal linguistic tool because it completely flips the power dynamic of the hesitation.
The source notes that this phrase buys your prefrontal cortex about 4 seconds of pure, guilt-free processing time. But the real magic happens in the social shift, right? If you just go silent, look at the floor, and shift your weight, you project the image of someone who is struggling, anxious, and out of their depth.
Highly defensive posture.
Yeah. But if you hold soft eye contact, maybe give a slight nod and say, let me think about how to put this, the perception instantly transforms.
You move from a state of visible deficit to a state of calm authority.
And the text gives this fantastic corporate scenario to illustrate this. Imagine your manager suddenly puts you on the spot, asking why a major project is 2 weeks behind schedule and demanding to know how you'll fix it by Monday.
Nightmare fuel.
Total nightmare. If you freeze and stammer, the manager's confidence in your leadership plummets. But if you deploy this phrase, it gives you that crucial 4-second buffer to calmly retrieve advanced business vocabulary from your passive memory.
Right, you aren't desperately grasping for words. You are carefully composing a strategic response about, like, automated email sequences or a temporary technical bottleneck.
Exactly. You sound like an analytical thinker evaluating options, not someone who just got caught off guard.
And that ties directly into another strategy from the masterclass, which functions as the ultimate professional deflector. That's a good question. Let me see.
Oh, I hear that one all the time in interviews.
Because it works. On a psychological level, this validates the person asking the question. By telling them it's a good question, you stroke their ego just a bit, making them feel insightful.
That's sneaky but brilliant.
Simultaneously adding, let me see, signals that their highly intelligent question requires active information retrieval, which socially justifies a much longer pause on your end.
Oh, so you can look down at your notes or pull up a file on your laptop without the silence feeling heavy or awkward.
Exactly. But earlier, the source touched on a physiological benefit to this specific phrase, too. What's fascinating here is that it has to do with stopping an amygdala hijack.
Amygdala hijack. Okay, break that down for us.
This is where the biology of communication gets really fascinating. When you are hit with a tough, aggressive question, say, a client harshly questioning your pricing structure, your nervous system registers it as a physical threat.
Like an actual danger to your life.
Yes, your heart rate spikes, and your amygdala, which is the brain's primitive threat detection center, wants to take over. Now, from an evolutionary standpoint, the amygdala does not care about complex grammar or nuanced vocabulary.
Right.
If a tiger is chasing you, you don't need to conjugate verbs. You need blood flow directed to your muscles so you can run.
So the brain literally shuts down the language centers to prepare for a physical fight or flight response.
Yeah.
That explains why your mind goes completely blank when you feel intimidated.
Exactly. The amygdala actively restricts access to the prefrontal cortex where your advanced vocabulary lives. But by calmly vocalizing a practiced automatic phrase like, "That's a good question, let me see," you actively regulate your own nervous system.
You're telling your brain there is no tiger.
You signal to your amygdala that there is no tiger. It prevents the hijack, keeping your heart rate steady and keeping your logical, language-producing brain online.
So you're basically talking your own nervous system off a ledge, while simultaneously complimenting the person who pushed you onto that ledge in the first place.
It is some incredibly high-level emotional intelligence happening in the span of 3 seconds.
It really is.
Okay.
Okay, let's shift gears from just needing to buy time to what happens when you actively make a mistake. Because we've all been there. You don't just freeze. You actually mess up your sentence halfway through.
Oh, the classic danger of drowning in what the coaches call linguistic quicksand.
Right. You're trying to sound authoritative, or maybe you're practicing a new language, and you launch into a sentence with a really ambitious, complex structure.
And suddenly you're completely tangled in past perfect conditional tenses.
Yes, you've lost the subject of your own sentence, and you have absolutely no idea how to land the plane. You realize halfway through that the architecture of your sentence simply cannot support the point you want to make.
It is a universally uncomfortable feeling. And the instinct for most people in that moment is to backpedal and apologize.
And the source strictly warns against that instinct. They say never stop and say, "Sorry, my English is bad," or "Sorry, I'm doing a terrible job explaining this."
Because doing that instantly lowers your perceived authority in the room. It focuses everyone's attention on your failure.
Exactly. Instead, the coaches suggest deploying a linguistic undo button. You just stop and say, "What I mean is."
It acts as a clear cognitive signal to the listener. It reframes the entire interaction. It tells them, "I am not failing to speak. I am simply clarifying my thoughts for your benefit."
Oh, that's such a powerful reframe.
It essentially erases the broken grammar of the previous sentence from the listener's immediate memory and gives you full permission to start completely fresh with a simple, direct structure.
It keeps the conversational energy moving forward instead of dwelling on the error, which connects perfectly to another technique they recommend for when you're struggling to frame an idea, which is asking yourself, how can I put this?
A great one.
Yeah, this one stood out to me because it's uniquely phrased as a question you are asking yourself out loud. And the coaches observe that doing this completely changes the chemistry of the room.
It absolutely does, because it initiates what we call conversational collaboration.
Conversational collaboration. So you're saying by asking a question out loud, you're tricking the other person's brain into thinking we're solving a mutual problem together rather than them just waiting for me to perform.
That is the core of it. When you are put on the spot, the dynamic often feels like a rigid exam. The other person is the examiner, grading you, waiting for you to produce the correct answer.
And that test-taking pressure skyrockets your anxiety.
Exactly. But humans are fundamentally highly social, problem-solving primates. When you ask a question out loud, how can I put this? You break that formal dynamic. You psychologically invite the listener to join you on a cognitive journey.
They transition from being a judgmental examiner to being a curious partner.
They want to help you solve the puzzle. The masterclass uses a brilliant example of trying to explain a highly confusing task management software. If you pause and mutter, how can I put this? The listener naturally leans in.
They are invested in what you're about to say.
Yes. It buys you the space to construct a creative metaphor, maybe comparing the software to a digital refrigerator where you're just moving magnets around. Because you prefaced it with that thoughtful question, the brief pause makes the resulting explanation feel highly intelligent and tailored, rather than stumbled upon.
It's like you were giving them a backstage pass to watch a genius at work, rather than forcing them to watch someone panic.
I love that analogy.
Okay, so we've covered escaping grammar tangles and deflecting high-pressure professional questions. But what about the most common, infuriating, everyday hurdle? Simply forgetting a specific noun.
Oh, yes.
The exact, literal name for a thing. You just want a colander. The plastic bowl with holes that you use to drain pasta. But your brain simply cannot locate the mental folder labeled colander.
The file is temporarily inaccessible. This is where the art of circumlocution becomes invaluable.
Circumlocution, which literally means talking around a word.
Right.
Without this tool, you just freeze and the conversation grinds to a halt while you snap your fingers trying to remember the word. But the coaches suggest bridging the gap with a simple phrase. It's like...
And then you just describe its function or its shape.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like that plastic bowl with tiny holes in it that you use to get the water out when you boil pasta. The other person immediately says, "Oh, a colander," and hands it to you. You never break the flow.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how the brain actually stores language, the brilliance of circumlocution makes perfect sense. Your brain's associative memory networks don't store words like a rigid alphabetical dictionary.
They don't.
No, they store information conceptually and visually, like a massive interconnected web. The exact phonetic label, the actual sound of the word colander or stapler, might be temporarily blocked by stress or fatigue. But the concept of the object, its physical shape, its weight, its function in the kitchen, that is still perfectly illuminated in your mind.
So the core idea is entirely intact. You just lost the name tag.
Right. And circumlocution allows you to seamlessly map that deep conceptual understanding into functional, descriptive language without ever breaking the social flow.
You don't have to pull out a translation app or stand there in frustrated silence.
Exactly. You just rely on the brain's natural ability to associate concepts.
It's brilliant because it keeps the momentum alive. But let's talk about the reality of deploying these tools. Buying all this time and using these phrases is great in theory. What happens when the person you are talking to absolutely refuses to let you have that processing time?
Oh, this is a very common issue.
Yeah. The masterclass brings in a real-world scenario from a listener named Ken, who works in Tokyo. Ken was practicing these exact time buyer phrases, but every time he paused and said, "Let me see," his well-meaning colleagues would immediately jump in and try to finish his sentences for him.
It is a phenomenon known as the helpful interruption.
And the source makes it clear that these colleagues aren't trying to be rude or dominate the conversation. Their brains abhor a vacuum. They see a pause, and their natural social instinct is to help fill the gap.
Right. They think they're doing him a favor.
But for Ken, who is actively trying to practice his language skills, it is incredibly frustrating. The coaches provide a solution based entirely on nonverbal visual cues. When you use a time buyer phrase, you have to pair it with a definitive physical gesture.
You raise an index finger slightly, or you keep an open, flat hand at chest level.
Yeah. Why does that work?
Because it establishes a universal physical boundary. It visually communicates to the room, I am still actively processing and the floor is still mine.
And crucially, you have to maintain soft, confident eye contact with the listener. You can never look down at the floor or roll your eyes up toward the ceiling in a panic.
Right, because looking away signals that you're lost, overwhelmed, and need rescue. Looking directly at them signals that you are actively composing a thought.
And if they still try to aggressively jump in, you combine the gesture with a gentle vocal pushback, something like, "Just a moment, let me finish this thought."
It's polite but firm.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
So, what does this all mean for someone who is genuinely struggling in a second language, or even just feeling overwhelmed in a meeting? Honestly, I gotta play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
If someone is willing to finish my sentence for me and just hand me the right word on a silver platter when I'm struggling, isn't that a win? It takes the pressure off, the point gets made, and we can all move on. Why fight it?
This raises an important question, and it's a very fair point. But there's a vital distinction here between short-term relief and long-term capability. Yes, in that exact moment, it feels significantly easier to let someone else rescue you.
It's a huge relief.
It immediately relieves the social pressure. But if you continually rely on others to finish your sentences, you are actively stealing your own opportunity for active language production.
You are outsourcing your brain's heavy lifting to someone else.
You are. Becoming a more fluent communicator, whether that's mastering a second language or just becoming a more articulate executive in your native tongue, requires neuroplasticity.
Loading the brain.
Exactly. It requires building new, robust neural pathways. You cannot physically build those pathways if you let someone else do the cognitive work every time it gets hard. You have to push through the friction yourself to make the retrieval process permanent. The struggle itself is the actual mechanism of learning.
The friction is the point. If you don't lift the weight, you don't build the muscle.
Exactly.
That perfectly sets up the call to action from the masterclass. Because the coaches don't just want you to passively listen to this theory, they issue a 24-hour fluency challenge.
Because knowledge without practical application won't build those neural pathways we just talked about.
Right. So here is the challenge for you. Listening to this deep dive right now, within the next 24 hours, you need to use at least one of these time-buyer phrases in a real-world conversation. Or, if that feels a little too high stakes today, just use it while talking to yourself out loud in a mirror.
Just get it out there.
Yeah, say, let me think about how to put this. Or what I mean is, use it even if you don't actually need to buy time.
The goal of the exercise is purely to lock in the physical muscle memory. You want to train your vocal cords and master the natural, calm intonation so that when the real panic does hit in a high-pressure situation, the phrase is physically ready to deploy without a second thought.
It's about making sure the emergency kit is packed and sitting by the door before the storm actually hits.
You know, reviewing all these strategies leaves me with one really provocative thought about how we view communication in general.
Oh, lay it on me.
We spend so much time idolizing this concept of native fluency, or we romanticize the idea of the perfectly articulate executive who never stumbles over a word.
We really do. It's on a pedestal.
But if strategically using these phrases to stall actually makes us sound more intelligent, more analytical, and more in control, how much of what we consider to be flawless native fluency is actually just a masterclass in highly practiced stalling?
Oh, wow.
Perhaps the true mark of an expert communicator isn't having instantaneous access to every single word in the dictionary, but simply mastering the art of the pause.
I absolutely love that perspective. It completely reframes the expectation we put on ourselves. It turns out human conversation isn't supposed to be a flawless binary search engine after all. We aren't machines, and we certainly aren't outdated laptops. It is perfectly fine if the system needs a few seconds to buffer, as long as you know how to make that buffering look like absolute genius. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take that 24-hour challenge, try out those tools, and take back control of your working memory. We'll catch you next time.